you all for joining today's session on controls integration during transformational events. Before we kick things off, I just want to point out a couple housekeeping items for everyone on the call here. First and foremost, this session will be recorded, and the recording and all the materials will be available after the webinar. Additionally, if you have any questions, please utilize the questions icon in the upper right-hand corner of the platform, and your questions will come directly to us during the presentation to be addressed. And lastly, regarding any questions that we're unable to address during the session, we will be sure to provide answers offline. So with that, we'll hop into the first slide here and want to do a quick round of introductions for the speakers today. So first off, my name's Adam Hola. I'm a partner and the risk advisory practice lead at Clearsulting. So my background includes almost 20 years of external and internal audit experience and helping my clients design, embed, and test effective governance, risk, and compliance programs. I'm accompanied by my colleague, Mark Walrod, who is a director and our control integration lead at Clearsulting. And Mark brings over 25 years of helping his clients understand and respond to risks, complexities associated with transformational events. He really specializes in the ERP deployments and helps his clients meet their compliance and operational objectives. And we are both really excited to walk you through a critical yet overlooked component of transformational success. So for those of you who are new to Clearsulting, we're a digital finance consulting firm that help organizations simplify and optimize their finance operations. So our team sits in that intersection of finance, technology, and compliance, and we've built a reputation for delivering sustainable solutions. And specifically within our risk advisory practice, we focus on being that trusted advisor across all three lines of defense for our clients and for all those solutions. So, in our experience, Mark and I have had the opportunity to support numerous clients through many high stakes transformations, whether that be, ERP implementations to third-party finance system implementations, even to M&A. And time and again, one theme continues to emerge, and its controls are sometimes often an afterthought and can be the root to costly setbacks if neglected. One of our core focus areas in our risk advisory practice here at Clearsulting is our controls integration service offering, where we embed risk mitigation and compliance directly into transformational events. Again, whether it's large ERP rollouts, third-party finance system implementations, or M&A, our controls integration team and work streams ensure that risks are identified and addressed proactively, not reactively. So with that, here on this first slide, I really want to get started with the why. Why are we talking about controls integration now more than ever? So first, you see here, transformation is accelerating. The digital transformation market is growing at over 26% annually, with the ERP market growing at over $238 billion by 2030. As we've all seen, AI adoption is surging and machine learning is hot on its tail. And organizations are launching multiple strategic programs in parallel to continue to gain efficiencies and gain that competitive advantage over their peers. You add into this technology disruptions. Legacy systems are being sunset fast. Everything's getting moved to cloud, and these types of projects are ramping up with forced upgrades and global consolidations and things like that, which is also increasing the cybersecurity footprint for all organizations. On top of that, you add in the AI-driven risks that are now emerging. Each of these technology disruptions are occurring simultaneously, putting a lot of pressure on businesses to continuously adapt. And then lastly, if you start thinking through things, on top of all of that, the regulatory landscape is becoming just more and more intense. In 2024, 8% of public companies disclosed material weaknesses, and in their compliance environment continues to be hot with updates and changes to things like cybersecurity, data privacy, ESG, and tariffs. But vulnerabilities often go unaddressed due to poor integration and planning around these updates and these changes. Lastly, on the next slide, as I mentioned, organizations are in a constant state of change. Organizations are no longer just executing a single project or program, but really multiple programs that consume both time and energy of their people, which results in a perfect storm of control complexity requiring specialized integration expertise. So bottom line, controls can no longer be treated as an afterthought. The risks, both financial, operational, reputational, they're all simply too high. Traditional transformation approaches often ignore controls until the end when testing has already started, or worse, post go live. But we see teams operating in silos, and the control environments just aren't being adequately tested or updated appropriately throughout the lifecycle of the project. So what does that result in? As you see, timeline delays, cost overruns, SOX deficiencies, compliance gaps, and quite honestly, just missed value as well. Over the remainder of the webinar here, Mark will walk you through what controls integration is, including things to be considered throughout the transformational event, what CI work streams look like, and Clearsulting's approach to mitigate these risks. But before I pass it over to Mark, I want to start things off with our first of 4 polling questions. So polling question number 1. How many digital transformation programs are currently planned or are operating right now over the next 18 months for your organization? 0, 1, 2 to 3, greater than 3, or just finished a digital transformation and catching my breath. So Mark, while we're waiting for participants to answer the polling question here, perhaps you can give some perspective on what you're seeing across your clients in regard to planned and roadmap transformations.
Yeah, happy to, Adam. And again, thanks everyone for joining today. We're looking forward to this discussion. Yeah, I would say what we're seeing, especially with the push from the major ERPs to really sunset their legacy apps, we're seeing a lot of concurrent programs up and running. And it's really just kind of what the business and the as you said, kind of the environment out there is really demanding right now, is that kind of the days of kind of having a singular focus on one program seem to kind of be a thing of the past, because we see a lot of clients that have multiple programs up and running, and then you are introducing kind of a new set of complexity and a new set of risk about those intersection points for those programs and whether or not they're working together and their objectives are aligned, or if they're not, and there's some misalignment there and maybe introducing some new risks.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for that perspective. And it looks like we have a majority of the polling questions in, so we'll share the results here. So, just like you said, Mark, a majority of the individuals in the call here are 2 to 3 or greater than 3. And like you mentioned, across the market, organizations are just continuously in a state of transformation, and they continue to leverage new technology. New processes are being developed, and that really is helping them springboard into multiple transformation initiatives. And have them build off each other. So, very similar to what we're seeing in the market. And then, for those of you, I think there's a few that just finished up some major transformations and need to catch your breath. For those of you that fall into that category, hope your transformation journey was smooth and it ended in success. So, Mark, maybe I pass it to you to start kind of walking us and deep diving into what is CI.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah. And as Adam kind of teed up here, really, when we think about controls integration, we really think about it as an opportunity for our clients to think about controls and to really set some expectations with the organization, with the project team, kind of with all the vendors that are sitting around the table, that controls are important. Controls are a requirement for us, and that if we do them along the way and we really kind of set expectations early within the program, we can really start to view control requirements pretty much as we look at as business requirements. So if we can document those things early in a program, we really can embed them, and then it really just becomes a part of the program. And it doesn't seem like a third car, that's kind of like hanging on to the side of a program, or a work stream that comes in late, and then you're putting additional requirements and meetings and constraints on the project team. So we really find that with these big transformational events, if it is an ERP program or a divestiture, that there is an opportunity really to build in controls as a mindset of an organization and really help kind of drive overall, really kind of increase the maturity of the overall kind of controls response for our clients. So with that, we'll jump into polling question number 2. Adam, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So polling question number 2, which of the following transformational technologies is your organization currently investing in? Number 1 being ERP implementation upgrades. So think of S4 HANA, Oracle Cloud and others. Robotics process automation, or RPA. Cloud migrations, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and third-party finance systems. So again, Mark, while we're waiting for some of the participants to answer the polling questions, I'd be interested to get your perspective here. I know there's a lot of initiatives going on through organizations all at one time. However, in the current landscape, we've seen the greatest focus being that ERP implementation upgrade space. Would you agree, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think kind of these 4 sunsets of the legacy versions of some of the main ERPs is definitely driving a lot of activity in the market. But I will say, probably, years ago, we saw a lot of kind of an all-in approach to, hey, we're going to select one of the major ERPs and then we're going to really kind of put all of our processes in that main ERP. I think now we're seeing kind of a move back to best of breed. So you're seeing a lot of these third-party apps that are coming in are being integrated into the main ERP. So for more of those kind of specialized functionalities, we're just seeing more and more of that as well. So it's delivering some good tailored functionality for our clients. But again, from a compliance and a kind of an internal controls perspective, it just gives you, some additional considerations of how are those systems talking to each other and how are you controlling that entire IT environment.
Great. I appreciate that, Mark. And it looks like we have most of the polling questions in, so we'll show the results here. And Mark, just as expected here, when we look across these percentages, majority of the individuals on the call are focused on that ERP implementation upgrade. As you mentioned, with those forced upgrades and legacy versions being sunset very quick and unsupported, not really surprised to see that number. A good majority split between the cloud migration and the AI ML side of the house, right? So a lot of teams going to that cloud migration and really moving the physical security concerns and utilizing the third-party hosting systems to improve their controls, as well as efficiency, reliability, and security and things of that nature. While some individuals here are focusing on AI and ML, and that's one of the biggest emerging technologies and risks right now in the market. A lot of organizations are investing a lot of resources into that, Mark. And so still trying to get their hands around the risks and also looking for those right use cases where you can start applying it to financials and financial statements. And then lastly, a good majority third-party finance systems. We're seeing a number of organizations start implementing these smaller finance systems as part of their tech stacks. These specialized systems are often able to provide some additional functionality above and beyond what their ERPs can do and really make it a nice, seamless, integrated process to gain efficiencies and effectiveness. So interesting results, Mark, and in alignment with the studies and the client research that we've been doing. So maybe I'll pass it back to you to continue on.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just one comment on that. And I think you hit on this as well, right? As we look at AI and we look at kind of our clients' adoption of AI, I would say most of our clients have an AI roadmap, right? They have some sort of a published strategy around getting into the AI space and allowing their employees to play with it in a controlled manner. But as you said, right, it's this tipping point of when does it become relevant to internal controls? When does it become relevant to external audit? I think we're really, really close to that, and maybe we'll see some with the 1231s coming up this year. But I certainly see in the next couple of years this being just a much larger topic when we think about controls, and we just think about kind of the use of AI in the financial statement process. So all good. That's great insight there. So let's just talk a little bit about how do we see controls integration fitting into your transformation, right? not all transformations are the same. Some are, smaller, maybe they last a couple of months, and we've got other, larger transformations that are going to maybe last several years, right? For some of these major deployments of ERPs or just even upgrades of ERPs could be a multi-year process. So when we think about it and really kind of going off of where we started, right, an embedded work stream that's there from the beginning is really where we've seen our clients have the greatest success, because it really just kind of helps to build expectations and understand that when we're sitting around the table, when we're thinking about our future state processes, we're going to have some controls minded folks at that table. And that's where they can really start to set expectations with the team around how configuration is going to be, turned on and turned off in the environment. And then maybe other things around documentation and evidence that's going to be maintained, right? We see a lot of clients going the agile approach. Obviously, we still see waterfall as well, or we see kind of a hybrid agile approach. And agile doesn't mean that we're not documenting, but we got to have those conversations with the team around what is going to be documented and how is it going to be documented, because that could really help us longer term from a controls perspective. And we also think with the controls team being at the table, you have an opportunity to influence design. And when we think really about that, we're not saying that the controls are really going to be the driving force behind some of your key decisions, not at all. But we do think there's an opportunity from time to time to influence the design around maybe how the system's being configured, how delegation of authority is going to be happening, maybe how some workflow or automation is going to be maybe available to you and whether or not you choose to use it. We think those are all kind of opportunities for the team to think about, hey, here's some automation. Not only will that help us from a business side to kind of do things a little bit more efficient, it's also going to help us from a control side. So let's maybe push the envelope on that a little bit more than we're doing today, where a lot of our clients are more manual in nature. And then everything that we talk about from a CI side is risk-based. So we're not here to look at every single impacted process that's going to be touched by the transformation. We really want it to be focused on the areas of the highest risk and where we think there's going to be the most benefit from having kind of the controls approach. So that means typically your in-scope business processes for your financial statement audit. If you're a SOX shop, it's going to be your SOX impacted processes. Now, does that mean you can't pull in some operational processes? No, of course not. You absolutely can. And we do see our clients do that from time to time. But typically the focus is going to be around kind of those in-scope SOX processes, or those that are really going to be impacting the financial statement. So again, that allows us to be more tailored, a little bit more strategic on how we integrate with the team and kind of where we integrate with the team. So now we'll talk a little bit about kind of the when, right? So I think we've said it before. We'll probably say it a few more times through the course of this discussion, but we really like being involved early in the life cycle of a program. If there's a phase 0 that the team is kind of kicking off the entire program with, that's really helping to kind of set the stage, let's absolutely have the controls team be engaged at that point. Now, their role may be small in a phase 0, but at least you're there, you're at the table, and you're able to start setting some of those expectations that we were talking about. I've been involved in projects really before vendor selection, because they wanted to have a controls mindset. Controls was important to the organization. So as they're really thinking about what software package they were even going to select, they wanted to make sure that their choices were going to be ones that were going to be able to support a well-controlled and mature control process on the back end. So definitely try to get in early, set those expectations, and then really start to look for those kind of strategic opportunities to integrate with the team. And as we said last time, right, everything here is going to be risk-based. So from an overall kind of process decomposition, you're going to be kind of looking down at that L3, the L4 level within the project team to be able to say, hey, which of these processes are going to be in scope for us, and where do we want to really deploy our resources? We'll kind of talk about some different ways that you can do that from an approach standpoint in a little bit. But we do think with that risk-based approach by process, you can really start to understand where is the best and kind of highest use of the controls team time by understanding really the processes that are being impacted by the program. Something else that we find from a control side is that if you're a part of some of the project team meetings and you understand some of the key decisions that are being made around critical design items, kind of what functionality is being used, are there different bolt-ons or third-party apps that are being included? Those are typically opportunities where maybe things are going to go outside of kind of the core ERP system, and that typically introduces a little bit more risk, and then that's an opportunity for us to come in with some controls as well. So it's important for the controls team to understand what are some of those key decisions that the project team is wrestling with, and then making sure that we're appropriately applying some compliance and some internal controls there as well. And then lastly, from understanding kind of where the team is at, customizations. So we know if we're staying kind of within the core of these ERP systems, leveraging the configuration that they give us out of the box, pretty easy for us to be able to come in and start to understand what's being set up, how are those processes going to flow through the system, and how can we build some controls around it. But we know a lot of our clients are going to have some level of customizations. And even as we see more and more clients kind of move to standard for their ERP deployments, we know there's always going to be some level of customization or localizations that are going to be there. Those are absolute kind of must from a control side to understand those. Are they financial in nature? Are they operational in nature? And then how can we go about building some controls and really kind of keeping some eyes on how that is being developed, how it's being tested, and then how it's being deployed.
Yeah.
So with that,
And
sorry,
Mark,
go ahead,
one thing I
Adam.
want to add
Yeah.
on to that, you kind of hit on this point, and I know I think a second or third time you said it, and you're going to say it again, but really integrating controls early is really important. And what this really allows the organization to do is even gives them an opportunity as part of this transformation to look at their control environment and allows the company to look and optimize that control environment and move those manual controls that you were talking about to more automated controls, because these new ERPs have new functionality, new automation, things like that. So not only does this help control owners see efficiencies by not having to do manual controls anymore, but it also can really help drive down the cost of compliance when you're talking about internal audit time and external audit time, what they're testing when you're testing automation versus testing, manual review controls, things of that nature. And then on top of that, it also allows companies to be have more preventative measures than detective measures in a control environment. So it really makes their environment more controlled and preventative.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Adam. I think the total cost of compliance question is really tough for our clients to answer, because oftentimes controls and execution of controls are very decentralized. So there's not good kind of line of sight as to like who all is even being impacted by them, what's the amount of time that those individuals are spending on controls, because it tends to be a part of a job, right?
Yep.
So it's hard to really be able to kind of understand what is the cost of compliance. But there's probably can be a general sense of we're pretty manual today, and we think we want to be a little bit more automated, a little bit more preventative in the future instead of detective. So I think to your point, there's an opportunity here, both internal to kind of what our clients are able to do with their own resources, but then also from an audit perspective as well to look for some efficiencies.
Great. Appreciate that insight, Mark. So I think we'll roll into polling question number 3.
Great.
So polling question number 3, who is primarily responsible for integrating controls during technology transformation at your organization? Compliance or internal controls, management being finance, accounting, IT, process owners, internal audit, shared responsibilities, or not clearly defined or non-existent. So Mark, while waiting on the poll here to wrap up, we did have a question that came through the portal. Someone asked, we've started our transformation journey already. Is it too late to start a true controls integration work stream? I guess, what perspective do you have for this person, Mark?
Yeah, I would say the short answer is no, right? I mean, so you'll hear us say, early is great kind of throughout this presentation today, but really, as long as you can try to get in and try to get in front of go live, I think there's always an opportunity to go live with a better set of controls. So I've been brought in, as, like I said, kind of pre-vendor selection. I've been brought in, a month before go live. And obviously, what you can do a month before go live is different than, earlier in the program, but you can really still get in and at least understand what are the processes that are going to be going live here in say a month. And then let's start to make sure that we're building out some controls and training those users of what they're going to need to be doing, post go live as those controls start to operate. So I think there's always an opportunity to get in and to, kind of mature the overall control environment. I'll share, I worked with a client, public company, multiple kind of business units. They had one business unit that was smaller. Their IT systems were never in scope from an audit side. They just never really hit the materiality threshold. System was probably 15, 20 years old. All of a sudden, this business unit growing, just really now becoming the shining star of this company. And now the system that had never really had controls over it, had never really kind of seen the light, all of a sudden now is very important from a controls perspective. So not your typical CI, more of a controls optimization than integration, but we were able to go in 15, 20 years after go live and really start to understand, how does this system work? How does the configuration work? How does the code work? And really build out a set of controls for that individual, for that team, so that before they went through their external audit cycle, they were able to really still get in front of it before it really became an in-scope application. So it's never too late, even if it's 15, 20 years later.
Great. I appreciate that, Mark. And it looks like we have all of our polling responses in, so we'll share the results here. Looking across results here, a majority of the individuals here had, say, management, which is finance, accounting, IT, and whoever the process owners are, while others say, shared responsibility, across various teams. So Mark, I think what you just talked about there, a little bit, we really see shared responsibility as being the most effective model that really drives the most success. Management owning final controls. However, during these transformational events, they're continuing to do their daily job functions, as well as working through design specs, testing, and just all the other components of the transformation. So when management has that help across other specialists, like your internal controls team or internal audit or others, it allows controls to be at the forefront of the conversation and leaves, very little scrambling after go live. So seeing that model work really well. I see a lot of people are pointing to just management, and again, it's a great start because they own controls, but you want to make sure that that they're really thinking through end-to-end controls, and some of the typical actions that they do, they might not realize it's a control, right? And they want to make sure that those are being documented and accounted for. And then a few individuals here have not clearly defined or non-existent. This is not uncommon, right, Mark? I mean, I think we see it across a lot of fast-moving transformations where team members are just stretched very thin across multiple priorities. And as you mentioned, it's just never too late to start a controls integration work stream, just to add that accountability and that risk coverage. So I think across the board, these aren't uncommon results that we're seeing, Mark.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think as we kind of jump into this next slide around roles and responsibilities that we see there, I think, Adam, your point, like, we see a lot of variation in how our clients kind of really structure controls and think about controls within their environment. And so not surprising that we're kind of seeing kind of a wide set of responses there, because, for some organizations, they may have a very kind of structured compliance team or SOX team, and others it may be a part of internal audit, others it may be embedded as part of the management function. I think what you and I have talked about, right, is just as long as someone is thinking about controls and someone kind of has that hat on, saying like, hey, we need to keep controls, in the forefront of these discussions. That's probably the most critical part for the success of some of these programs. So with that, we're going to spend just a little bit of time kind of going through some typical roles and responsibilities of controls for some of these big transformational programs. So this is a bit in the context of an ERP deployment, but we could certainly think about it in light of other types of transformational events as well. Kind of similar principles would apply. We'll start with the business, right? Obviously, the business is the one that's really the driving force for all of this. They are setting the North Star for the program. They are the ones that are saying, we're here and we want to go there. We know we need to make operational improvements. We need to make process improvements. So they really become the overall, project sponsors, really setting the tone for the overall program, and then also really have to be a driving force behind being a change agent for the company. So we know that these programs are significant investments, and the worst thing that could happen is that you try to recreate your old processes in your new technology, right? So oftentimes we need to see the business being kind of a driving force, making sure that we are moving to standard, that we are really taking advantage of all the functionality that the new system is offering you. So with that then brings in your system integrator or your SI, right? This is typically a third party that's going to be coming in that has the technical skills. They're the hands on the keyboard. They understand the coding. They understand the configuration. They're going to be helping you from a data side. They're going to be helping cleanse your data and get it ready for move and all the mapping. So the SI is going to have a very, very significant role in these programs. And what we've seen from a trend perspective over the last couple of years is more of a move to a template approach for a lot of these SIs, where maybe based on your industry or your size, they're going to come in with a bit of a pre-configured template that says, hey, for SAP, for Oracle, for these different technologies, we've got what we think looks good for your industry. And while that can certainly help accelerate a lot of decision making, a lot of the early design workshops, there is still an awful lot of work of making sure that fit is going to be there for you post go live. So it can't just be happy path, right? We need to understand some of the variations and nuances of your processes to make sure that template is meeting your needs, or if there needs to be tweaking to it, that's going to be occurring. And that's really where we've seen the role then of the business integrator come along. And for those of you that aren't familiar kind of with that term, as a lot of these SI houses have gone to much more of a technical deployment focus, they're not always bringing some of those leading practices around business processes and what does good look like, or some of the governance, and really helping to understand how the overall program's impacting the organization. So we do see business integrator kind of becoming more and more of a common role as a part of these big transformational programs. And I think when you look at the roles that the business integrator and the system integrator are asked to do, controls is not one of them. And I think this is a conversation that I've had many times over the years where, sit down with a controller or a CFO and they say, well, hey, we hired a really, really good SI. They've been doing this for decades. They know the technology. They're going to give us a well-controlled process, right? That's just the nature of the solution that they're going to deliver for us. And what we have found time and time again is that they don't, that their focus is really on process, and that getting the system in on time, and hopefully on budget. Their focus is not going to be on necessarily controls. And just to give one example, like security, they're going to bring a set of default roles that they think are going to meet your needs. And for your business to get in and to use the environment, those roles are going to meet your needs. But maybe those roles are also really wide. They're kind of an awful lot of access has been granted within those roles. Well, maybe that starts to create some security issues, sensitive access issues, segregation of duties issues. So if there's not someone there saying like, hey, we need to be careful, we can't have A and B combined within one user, that may not be top of mind for some of those system integrators. So that's really where we see the role of the controls integrator coming in. And again, the controls integration team could be an in-house team. It could be kind of a hybrid team that's with some consultants, or we also see it at times fully outsourced because either the capacity isn't there, or maybe some of the technical know-how isn't there for the folks in-house, right? It's one of those, you don't know what you don't know. If you haven't worked with this technology before, even though you understand your current processes and controls, you may not be able to make that mapping over to the new technology. So this is where we see the controls integrator coming in, being the, at the table as we're talking through the design, looking at those future state processes, and really then beginning to help to optimize the overall controls response by helping to influence that design. And then lastly, the audit team, obviously very, very important that both the internal and external audit team are included at strategic points during the overall program. We want them to have a great understanding of what the processes and controls are going to look like post go live. We want their buy-in. We want them to be able to come in and review all of this stuff on a pre-go live basis, because it's really going to enable everyone to be on the same same page, that post go live, if we have these controls in place, that we're going to be in a well-controlled and a mature control environment. So we really see kind of all these parties working together to really come up with a good control solution. From there, we'll talk a little bit about scope of what do we kind of see typically being considered from a controls integration perspective. I'll talk about this a little bit more from the ERP side, and then I'll have Adam kind of weigh in with some more of the specific considerations for third-party hosted apps. So for those of you that are in this space, some of these things on here are definitely not going to surprise you. IT general controls, foundational in nature, right? Critically important, obviously going to be important. The move from wherever you are today in your legacy side to your new technology, maybe that's a big lift, maybe it's not, and maybe it's just an upgrade and there's a tweaking. But we absolutely want to make sure that we've got our IT controls in a good spot, because everything else is built upon them. Business process controls, that's probably where we spend the bulk of our time. When we just look at like how we build our teams, how we want to be able to integrate with the overall project, it's really about understanding those future state processes and understanding how we can build controls into those future state processes. SOC reports with the move to the cloud and kind of everything that's been happening in that space and accelerating in that space, critically important to understand what's my responsibility as management versus what is my vendor providing for me. And I'll let Adam comment a bit more on that in a little bit, but much more, more critical importance there than it was just a few years ago. Data, we talked about data a little bit already, but data is just a critically important part of any ERP program, and it's an area that is often underappreciated in its complexity. So from a control side, we really want to understand what is management's approach, how is the data being cleaned, how is it being converted, how is it being migrated, what's the kind of the overall strategy, the approach to mocks and all of that, to make sure that when we get to kind of final cutover, that we've got our data in a good place. There's another bucket around kind of governance and SDLC that we would typically be looking at. From an SDLC side, that's more of your blocking and tackling type things that your audit functions are going to be looking for. The governance side can really depend on the overall program and its kind of importance to your organization of like how structured of a governance process is in place over the program, but certainly are some like leading practices that we would look for to make sure they're in place, so that as far as kind of how issues are being managed, how the program is being managed, that all of those things are working in concert, and that frankly that there is a line of sight to project leadership and just the senior leadership around how things are really going, kind of a truth and reporting approach. Then a few technical things here around interfaces and key reports and any other kind of key configurations that might be there that are really going to be able to help us from a controls perspective. And then last, and probably my favorite, security and segregation of duties. This is where I spent a lot of time over the years, an area that also kind of underappreciated at times, as far as like, hey, we'll just give the users the access they need and we'll be off and running. But we know security, and certainly on the SOD side, can cause an awful lot of problems post go live if we don't have those things well controlled and in place, and perhaps have introduced some GRC technology to help maybe govern kind of what is actually in the system, and then to monitor it on an ongoing basis. So with that was kind of from the ERP side. Adam, do you want to maybe share a few thoughts from a third-party app side?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So from a third-party app side, all the things that you kind of walk through generally apply, right? ITGCs, business process controls, SDLC. But the one thing that's a little bit different that you had mentioned is around that SOC report evaluation and the complementary control considerations that are captured within that. So again, those controls that the service provider says, hey, you're using my software, my services, I can't control this, you need to, right? And so when thinking about that, what's really, really important when you're starting thinking through the third-party systems, it's always, hey, we got to obtain that SOC report, at the end of the year. Well, that's great, and yes, but you need to think through, early in the implementation before you go live. You really need to get that prior year SOC report as part of that future state design session to identify the important and key CWCs, which will help you design your future state control environment. So again, these controls should be designed and included within your business requirements. And quite honestly, Mark, they should go through the same rigor of their testing cycles like any other functionality, just at a little bit lesser extent, right? So at a bare minimum, the CWCs should be part of that future state RACM that you're putting together. But like Mark had already outlined, outside and beyond those CWCs, you have different configuration settings being applied, new automation opportunities, and think of interfaces, automated jobs, things like that. And for these additional risks, other controls beyond CWC should be set up. And then on top of that, each year, like I mentioned, getting that current period SOC report and evaluating it for whether or not those hosted applications are effective. So, hey, do you have a design template that's really imperative to have so you can understand the overall report? But are you looking at other carved out reports or other subservice providers within that report? Are you evaluating deviations or even qualifications? And then even on that, are you also mapping out your CWCs and CSOCs, for those subservice provider CWCs? So, Mark, there's a lot of things to consider from a third-party perspective as well, but nothing that's insurmountable. Definitely if you start it early in the project, it can be a really smooth, easy process if you start with the future state design and really incorporating it during that point.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate that. So what we'll do now is just maybe spend a little bit of time thinking about how does all this kind of come together? Like how do we kind of see the CI kind of program really coming together? So from the business side, from our client side, your current state processes, your current state control. So there's an awful lot of institutional knowledge that your team can bring to the CI process, and it's critical, right? And you also know your pain points. You kind of know what's working well and what's not working well for us, and what are some of those areas that, gee, we really wish we could be more efficient here. We wish we could be more automated here. So you have kind of all that legacy knowledge. So it's critically important to be plugging that into the CI approach. And then as we talked about on the roles and responsibilities slide, you've got your system integrator. They're really the ones that are going to be helping drive what do your future state processes look like. So the technical, the config, kind of the actual like nuts and bolts of the system as that's coming together, they're really going to be the team with that expertise. So we've got those current state processes coming in, we've got those future state processes coming out, and then what are those other really kind of critical pieces to CI? Well, we think we need a controls team that really understands ERP technology. It goes back to you don't know what you don't know. So if you haven't worked with some of these technologies, you don't necessarily understand config and how they work. So you need to bring someone that has a strong ERP knowledge to the table. You also need to bring a controls person that understands business processes, right? They can't be just a techie. They also need to understand business process, just knowledges and kind of how we want transactions to flow. And then we see all the different compliance requirements, right? So we talked a lot about SOX today, but we know there's a lot of compliance requirements out there that go well beyond SOX that you may be needing to adhere to for your organization. So who understands those compliance requirements? Can we bring those requirements to the table early in the program so we can start to build and build to control those as the program continues to evolve? And then last, we think there's a set of accelerators, and that's something from a Clearsulting side that we've built out over the years as kind of a point of view of what does good look like when it comes to business process controls, automated versus manual controls, ITGC, SOD, and the like. So we think those accelerators, no different than what your system integrator may be bringing for some of your future state processes, that you could really benefit from some accelerators around the control side as well. So that's really where we see all of this stuff coming together to really form the overall controls integration approach. So with that kind of thought around some of the key kind of inputs, what are some of the typical outputs that we see? And maybe before we get to those, I'll just say, when we think about controls, we really see controls as an iterative process. And that's why we see controls, like we like to see controls be a part of the entire life cycle of the program, because we know as the business is getting together and they're talking about their future state processes and they're kind of tweaking their processes and they're understanding how they want to leverage the technology, it continues to evolve, right? You're not kind of visiting a single process once and then moving on, right? You're going to visit these processes multiple times. Controls are going to follow suit. So you want to be there. You want to be iterative in nature with controls. And that's really where we kind of see, this, kind of ongoing involvement of the controls team, with the overall program. So as some typical outputs, obviously risk and control matrices, kind of updating whatever you have today to be able to reflect your future state processes. We see those as obviously kind of just foundational in nature. Control test scripts. Adam hit on this a little bit a few minutes ago, right? What we find is if we can test controls along the way, kind of going back to this embedded nature of CI, it's not this big then lift for the program. So we typically will look at test scripts that are going to be performed as part of SIT or UAT, and we'll say, hey, there's 6 steps in this process for this end user to test this piece of functionality. Well, from a control side, if we add maybe 1 more test step, maybe 2, maybe grab a screenshot, we're now really helping to establish the baseline for that environment on a go-forward basis. So we really think, again, with some kind of strategic integration, controls can just be embedded in the program, and you can really lay the foundation for your future audits and just all your future compliance needs by building some test scripts in along the way. Obviously, we talked about segregation of duties. You may have a GRC tool. You want to be able to tailor your overall kind of GRC rule set to meet your custom needs. Process flows, organizations, a lot of companies seem to like process flows and controls-based process flows. We're able to see where your risk and your controls are from a flow perspective. And then CRDs. Our CRDs are really what we think about. It's some of the why behind the control. That's documenting, what is the config, how does it work, what is the control, how have we designed it, and then kind of for the future readers of this documentation, why did we make those decisions as a part of this program? Because, teams disperse, people move on. A couple years down the line, we find it critically important to have documented some of the why behind your overall control decisions. So with that, why don't we go to our 4th polling question, Adam?
Yeah, we'll move through this one pretty quickly here. So, what is the biggest challenge you face with controls integration during transformations? 1, lack of stakeholder alignment. 2, insufficient resources or expertise. 3, speed of change outpacing controls. 4, limited visibility into system roadmap and design. Or 5, controls just seen as an afterthought. And so, Mark, while we're getting the voting coming through pretty quickly here, maybe if you could spend a quick second, what do you typically see as being one of the root causes or challenges for controls integration for a lot of your clients?
Yeah, I would say two things come to mind: capacity of their current team, because folks are normally pretty busy. So just capacity to be able to appropriately engage with the transformation. And then the second piece I'll go back to is just the technical skill set. If you're moving to new technology that you haven't worked with before, you have to find a way to upskill your team members so that they're comfortable in that new technology and that they can help really impact the control environment in a positive way. So probably capacity and technical skill sets.
Great, thanks, Mark. And we just got all the polling in, so we'll show the results there. And just like you said there, Mark, we're seeing a couple of things on the polling results: insufficient resources or expertise, like you had mentioned. And the other one out there, Mark, is controls seen as an afterthought. And I know, it's unfortunate that that happens, but it's not that uncommon that happens. So, as we all know, results of that are project delays, extended hypercare, control deficiency count increasing. So it's important to have that embedded early in the project that we've been talking about. So, it's critically important to have that be one of the leading pieces in starting with controls at the beginning of the project. So again, very, very common in what you kind of mentioned there, Mark.
Yeah, I think trying to avoid the external audit pain post go live because controls weren't where they needed to be. I think Adam, you and I have both lived through that many times over
Yep.
the years. It's not a fun place to be for anyone, right? Because there's an awful lot of work that happens, an awful lot of look back procedures that are performed, and it's a pain that we've seen. Clients typically kind of go through that once, and then they're like, okay, we got to do a little bit more of this on the front end going forward because those can be pretty painful exercises for everyone. So yeah, that's yeah, like you said, not atypical.
Yep.
Well, great. Well, let's just spend a little bit of time talking through kind of potential ways to integrate controls into the overall project team from a timing perspective. So there's a lot of different models that can be deployed here for really large programs that are maybe multi-year and just very complex in nature. We may see a controls team that's on site full time and it really kind of has a continuous presence with the overall project team. And that oftentimes is an appropriate response. But oftentimes it's also maybe not needed as well. So this SIP approach, kind of these control integration points, where you're really coming in at strategic points along the way, is also a very effective approach. And you don't necessarily need all 6 of these. Again, it's going to be risk-based, but you're probably going to need at least 2, if not 3, at minimum to be able to come in at some very strategic points to understand how is the design coming along, and can we talk about and influence maybe the design a little bit, and then certainly around kind of build and test and making sure that everything that was discussed and contemplated is also being built and tested, and that we're capturing and evidencing that as well. So a lot of flexibility in how the overall controls team can be integrated into the program. And that would be something that could kind of get right sized on the front end of the program so that everyone's on the same page with, hey, the controls team is going to be here for this discrete amount of time. They're going to do their work. They're going to provide their recommendations, and they're going to come back. So again, just letting everyone kind of be on the same page with kind of how their controls are going to be embedded. So with that, we'll kind of move on to just some key takeaways here and kind of wrap things up. Obviously, we've said this a bunch now. We love to engage early. We think it's really important for the overall success of the program and to really go live with a mature set of controls that are really ready for your compliance objectives day one. And that's really what we're aiming for with an awful lot of the CI is just kind of day one readiness for controls. From both a configuration side, but also the people side, and making sure that the folks that are performing those controls and reviewing those controls are ready for their new responsibilities as well. We talked about how data and security can often be a bit of overlooked along the way. So just keep a good focus on those. And then I would just say risks don't age well. So if you find something early in the program, let's just start talking about it. Let's give the team an appropriate amount of time to respond and kind of avoid those last minute surprises. And with that, we think if you avoid those last minute surprises, you're really going to minimize any sort of post go live rework that we've certainly seen some of our clients go through. So we think with all of that, you can certainly kind of embed controls along the way and come out on the backside in a very positive spot. So Adam, with that, I'll kind of pass it back to you for any other questions that may have come in or any closing thoughts.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. So, yeah, just kind of in closing, as Mark mentioned, controls integration really isn't just a compliance checkbox, right? It should really be a strategic enabler for transformational success. At Clearsulting, we've helped organizations turn controls from a liability into a competitive advantage in their transformation. So, would love to help you and chat through that with you. But Mark, there are a couple questions that came through the queue. I know we have about 3 minutes left here, and maybe we can go through a couple of these quickly. And then whatever we don't get to, we can reach out to the team afterwards. But one question came up when you were talking through the SIP process, Mark, around whether or not controls integration teams should embed it into existing sessions, or should they have their own specific control sessions? I guess, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say it's going to be tailored based on the way the program is set up. I would say typically we would want to start by embedding in the existing sessions. Be strategic as to which ones you go to, right? It goes back to that risk-based approach so that you're not sitting through workshops that you don't need to. But I think to minimize the impact on the project team, if you can participate in some of their sessions along the way, kind of get your base understanding of kind of the future state process, and then maybe you follow up with some targeted controls focused discussions that are maybe 30 to 60 minutes in length, with like just select team members. So it's probably a little bit of a hybrid approach there that we've seen be pretty successful.
Great. Appreciate that. Again, we have a couple more, but I think maybe we can get to one last one here before we end the session. So a question came through. You had talked about, the controls integration team could be internal resource. It could be a hybrid, like where you have a third party, things of that nature. One of the questions that came in around that was specific to, what do you typically see as the size of a controls integration team? Is there a rule of thumb? Does it vary? I guess, can you comment on that?
Yeah, definitely would vary. I would say we typically see a split between the business process and the IT side. On the IT side, we'd probably see, a team member or two that's focused on IT general controls, and then maybe a couple of other team members that are focused on security and segregation of duties, or maybe the GRC platform, if there's one that's part of the program. So normally there's going to be a handful of people on the IT side that are kind of focused in those different areas. And the business process side vary a bit on the number of processes that are being impacted, but you may have, at least a handful of team members on the business process side that may be broken up by cycle, so that they can kind of participate in the different workshops and kind of be tagged to those different cycles. So a bit of a business process or cycle driven approach on the BP side.
Got it. And do you see those being full-time resources or part-time?
Yeah, going back to, that there is an approach where team members are kind of there the entire time, so they could be, but I would say most often it's not a full-time role, because it is a bit of a checkpoint or a SIP approach to engagement with the team. So, it's going to be a discrete block of time that they're going to be engaged full time, then they may go away for a little bit and then come back. So you kind of keep the lights on along the way, but you probably have more intense times with a heavier engagement.
Great. No, appreciate that perspective, Mark. And again, we're wrapping up here. I guess for any other questions, Mark, we'll follow up after the webinar here. But I just want to thank everybody for their time. Mark, thank you for the insight. Much appreciated. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact us at the website here. And again, thank you all for your time, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.